you. And Francisco, please.
Thank you very much, Luke. I feel at home here. This is family. Been working with CLS for a very long time, on and off on many occasions, but in the last period, quite regularly. I'm really grateful that you give us the chance and the opportunity to actually discuss, particularly Venezuela, but not exclusively. As everybody knows, Venezuela had a devastating double earthquake on the 24th of July. The intensity in the Richter scale wasn't that high. I'm saying this as a Chilean. We tend to have earthquakes of 9 to 10 in the Richter scale. The two in Venezuela were 7.2 and 7.5. But it's precisely those two, the combination of two that came from two angles, as it were, it was more devastating than a normal one, if you see what I mean. So the consequences were devastating, and the country had not yet healed from the military attack by the United States on the 3rd of January, when more than 100 people were killed. US military forces bombed 4 cities, and then they kidnapped the president. And the United States has a deployment of military forces around Venezuela, which they said explicitly, not once, several times, by President Trump, Marco Rubio, and others already, that where the Delcy Rodriguez government misbehaved, that is to say, didn't do what they want, then there would be the possibility of a second strike, or more than a second strike, including what they prefer, which is decapitation. That is to say, the layer of people who are running the government right now, Delcy Rodriguez, all the ministers, generals in the armed forces, leaders of the Socialist Party, Socialist United Party of Venezuela, could be decapitated, assassinated, basically. So the devastation was incredible. So far, just to give you some figures, the number of people dead, according to the official figure, is 2,945. The total number of people injured in different degrees is 22,445. Interestingly, 6,462 people have been rescued from the rubble. 190 buildings have completely collapsed. 886 buildings have been severely affected or damaged. And this has left 16,309 people without homes. And ever since the 24th of July, there have been 800 replicas, smaller earthquakes, which you never know whether they're going to be as intense or just a sort of minor version of it, a tremor, have taken place since the earthquake. So if you suffer the trauma of being through an earthquake where buildings collapse and you see people dying, I have that experience myself, it is quite difficult to recover, especially you cannot relax because of these tremors that take place throughout the day. Some of them are not felt, many of them are. Now, the government acted very quickly indeed. The epicenter of the earthquake was in a place called La Guaira, which is a small state in the federal system of Venezuela, which is about 1.5 to 2 hours away from Caracas. The earthquake affected 7 states, 7, state of the federation. And La Guaira was the worst one. La Guaira has a population of about 350,000. It's quite small. It's quite hilly. It's in the Atlantic coast in the Caribbean. I've been there. I visited the place on several occasions already, and that's where the devastation took place. That's everything. That was the worst affected area of it, which in a sense is, say this advisory, is positive rather than taking place in more urbanized areas, bigger areas. such as Caracas, which is, several million. You can imagine what the devastation would have been had the earthquake been in Caracas. So on the one hand, it was easier to concentrate forces on deployment of rescue operations and so on in these smaller areas. And they mobilized immediately, literally next day, around 19,000 military personnel to ensure that, things were protected and there were no misbehavior or any kind, which are typical of these situations. 86,793 plus families have received assistance of various kinds. More than about 10,000 tons of food have been distributed. There are already 29,000, nearly 30,000 registered volunteers. The reason why volunteers were registered is because they didn't want everybody and anybody in the population to just go to La Guaira and then complicate things. They wanted to register people to ensure that they could contribute with some skills, some expertise, doctors, nurses, engineers, and so on, builders, etc. So people had to register in Caracas and in other places and then travel to La Guaira, which was quite orderly. The information from Jorge Rodriguez, the president of the National Assembly, said that the registration and deployment of the volunteers was pretty much perfect. He said, rather than a huge crowd coming in, that people could not travel and could not come into La Guaira. This was forbidden. This was blocked. And the reason was to ensure that everything was clear out, the machinery to clear out the rubble and so on, the debris had to be able to operate without, traffic jams or anything. So this was done quite quickly, quite rapidly as well. There are registered at least 3,281 international rescue workers from many countries in the world. I don't know how many, but loads and loads and loads and loads of countries send volunteers. Rescue workers, which is quite important. Mexico was the first one to arrive. And then everybody, even Cuba, despite the difficulties that it's going through, send rescue workers, of course, to help out and so on. And this was very helpful because the authorities in La Guaira were able to actually distribute and allocate these people to various places. And these international rescue workers were supplemented, if I can use that word, by 153 rescue dogs. Those who actually are able to sniff and detect where humans are, and so on. So far, according to the official information 2 days ago by Delcy Rodriguez, the interim president, 147 countries have offered aid to Venezuela, which is quite positive. 34 come from the United Americas, from the United States all the way down, 43 from Asia, certainly including China, 19 from Africa, certainly including Burkina Faso. I mentioned that because it's one of my favorites. South Africa as well, then 46 from Europe and 3 from Oceania, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. And the government was contacted by 31 international and multilateral organizations to offer support as well. Delcy Rodriguez received phone calls from 72 heads of state, and she awarded medals to the rescue contingents of El Salvador, Costa Rica, Mexico, Panama, Turkey, Cuba, and Vietnam. So this give you a panorama. There is a particular case which I want to highlight. One security worker in a building was actually trapped under the rubble for 7 days. I cannot imagine what that would be, to be under the rubble for 8 days, just being unable to move. And then he was rescued recently and, was rescued, was taken out, and he's in hospital in sort of reasonably good health. He didn't suffer a great deal of injury. Now, that is the description of it. But we come to the difficult part. According to the United Nations, what is it called? The United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, which specializes in looking at, how much has been destroyed and how much will it cost to reconstruct it, which is what Venezuela is moving into now. According to them, there was a first preliminary estimate by another body of the United Nations, something like a week ago, perhaps less than a week ago, which estimated that the damage would be $60.7 billion, which was not much. Then there is this particular office, and I said, let me give you the figures. In total, the total amount for the reconstruction as they estimated this far is 47 billion. That is to say, on the basis of the information you have now, which is quite comprehensive, to reconstruct all the buildings, the infrastructure, airports were damaged, motorways, power stations, you name it, train and railways, and so on. All of these, if were to be repaired and reconstructed, it will cost 47 billion. Just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, to sort of do a sort of comparison, the GDP of Nicaragua is 17 billion per year. So 47 billion, in an economy that has been subjected to about 27 years of sanctions and 4 years of horrible sanctions, which led the country to nearly down the pan. 47 billion is gigantic, especially a country which is still blockaded. Although the United States is sort of suspending some of the sanctions to allow with licenses for oil companies and for other companies, for financial companies, financial institutions to be able to operate, then these can be taken away anytime. And governments, Joe Biden and Trump, have done exactly the same. They suspend sanctions when it's convenient for them for short periods.
Sharp seemed impossible for me. I used to wrestle with genes that pinched, squeezed, and never flattered.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt anybody.
Continue.
Thank you. So this suspension of the sanctions for short periods actually makes the country hostage to the United States aggression, which is, part of the problem. So one of the important things to understand is, at the moment, is two things. Not only there is this reality where, according to very precise information, the amount of illegally retained assets that belong to Venezuela in the United States in frozen accounts, frozen bank accounts, assets that have been confiscated legally, and many other assets in the United States, as well as assets that belong to Venezuela, held illegally in European outfits, such as, the Bank of England. In total, that would amount to something in the region of $40 billion, including the 31 tons of gold held, retained illegally in the Bank of England. So one of the crucial dimensions for us is that the whole apparatus of sanctions, which actually was suffocated and asphyxiated in a country, still intact. The suspension of the sanctions through licenses is not good enough at all. It helps, but it alleviates very little. So we really need to make sure that we campaign to lift them all together. So that's the first thing that we want to do. But all of this is taking place, all of these, aggression that's been taking place against Venezuela in the context of the attack on January and then the earthquake now, The United States has positioned itself around Venezuela. Basically, the United States has a very horrible gun pointed at the head of the government. The government is formally independent, but it's under this threat, which could be triggered at any time. And knowing Trump, being Trump, God knows what he might do, especially now that he's desperate because everything is collapsing in the United States. The project that Trump and Rubio have put forward very clearly on behalf of the US government and the ruling class of US imperialism is to colonize Venezuela, to really colonize. For that to be successful, they need to actually bring about regime change. And regime change means that they need to do something quite drastic to purge the country from Chavistas. That is the logic of it. So I was quite worried. I'm still worried, and I think we should alert people. When I learned that rather than the United States sending rescue workers, which everybody else has done, the United States sent, nobody knows exactly, but hundreds of Marines. Why should you send soldiers? In this context, when what the country needs is firefighters, is engineers, is doctors, nurses, and rescue workers. And the United States has them in large quantities. So there is the possibility of creating some sort of kerfuffle inside Venezuela in this devastating context in order to do something drastic, such as, we'll send troops and we'll stay there to help out kind of thing. I'm not saying this is exactly what is going to happen, but we need to be alert that this is a possibility. And all of this is taking place in the context of the media onslaught with huge amount of fake news. Huge amount. I mean, the demonization and the fake news that the government is neglecting people, that the government didn't mobilize things on time, that the government is blocking the information, is blocking the resources, is blocking the medicine, it's all lies. Lies, absolutely blatant lies. And in these participate the corporate media, the BBC, the Guardian, the New York Times, and everybody else, CNN, etc. So from our point of view, it's quite important to do this. So how are we dealing with this ourselves as the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign? The first thing is that we have put a huge amount of intensification of our petition for the gold to be returned. There is absolutely no justification, not legal, not political, not of any kind, especially moral, in this context, that the United Kingdom government, whoever it might be, continues to deny, in this context, to give Venezuela back the gold that belongs to them, to be used precisely for the purpose of reconstruction, medicine, and so on. At the time when the gold was legally retained by the Tory government, the value was 1.2 billion. Given the increase in the price of oil, the price of gold, I beg your pardon, this has gone up to about 4 billion. And if gold continues to go up, 1 kilogram of gold in the UK market would cost you around £100,000. That gives you an idea how much 31 tons, will be worth. So it is absolutely essential, and the government of Venezuela has insisted that this is done, that is to say, the return of the gold to Venezuela is done through the United Nations, where the United Nations are going to monitor exactly how this is going to be spent. Because, the United States used the fake argument that Venezuela was going to use to buy weapons for luxury projects or, to benefit the people on top. It's a complete lie. This was proposed several years ago and is still in place. So that's one. So we want people to actually continue to mobilize for the petition and get as many people as possible to sign the petition, because we want to present these signatures to actually the Foreign Office. So far, up to several days ago, we had 13,000 signatures and we need more. So that's number one. Interestingly, Richard Burgon, as one could expect, he's put forward some resolution, some sort of motion, or certainly has made a statement in Parliament demanding precisely this, that this gold is returned immediately and sanctions are lifted. It's very likely, we're working on this, it's very likely it's going to get, substantial parliamentary support. We'll let you know what it is. So that's another one. And we need to make sure that, we absolutely campaign for all of this. So what I want to do, if that's okay, is there is there is a statement that we have. So let me find it. If I can put it on the chat for people to have it, which is, let me get the chat. This is our statement to get the gold returned, so people can use it and then publicize it and sign it and get as many as possible, as quickly as possible. That would help. That's number one. Number two, if anybody wants to give any donation, monetary donation, which was complicated some time ago, because Venezuela has literally been expelled from the international financial system. So to send money was very difficult. It's the same with Cuba. You cannot send money to Cuba because, Cuba, no bank will actually carry out the transaction. So Venezuela set up a website, which is the Venezuela no está sola. Venezuela says Venezuela no está sola is Spanish. It means Venezuela is not alone. It's in English as well. I just gave you the English version. So if you look at that and anybody wants to give any money or any support, please, by all means, use this one. And this is is run by a bank for reconstruction and development, which belongs to Venezuela. And the money goes straight there. And at the moment, as we understand officially from the government, there are no problems with that. Then, if I can, I want to put, which is in X, Richard Bergen's letter and motion and position on the question of the gold. And then just for people to have information, which is, the Tricontinental Research Institute, which is quite progressive in organization, has produced this article, which is Red Alert number 22, The Truth Under the Rubble. And it goes through demolishing every single one of the fake news, basically 4 of them, which concentrate on those things that I mentioned. It would be very good for people to have this, to read it and to distribute as much as possible, because that's our way to actually counteract the information. And finally, yeah, here it is. I have, let me see if I can get it, because I want to give you, this is access to the report of the United Nations Office on Reduction of Risk of hazards such as earthquake and so on, which produces I think it's still temporary, provisional, because, the situation continue to be reassessed for you to have. And the importance of this argument is Venezuela not only is entitled to that money, to the money that has been illegally retained everywhere, but Venezuela needs that urgently. The people of Venezuela need it absolutely urgently because of the earthquake, and not only because of the sanctions. So we will be campaigning, we'll keep you posted, we'll keep you informed. And if anybody wants to have any question today or later on, please don't hesitate to contact me or to contact the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign office, and we'll certainly oblige. Thank you very much for the opportunity again and for your solidarity.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Francisco. He's disappeared from my screen. Oh, you're there. You're there. Okay. I think we'll take questions at the end of the other speakers. So we will hold the questions for later on. I saw a message saying that the link was broken that you posted. You'll send it to CLS. We will circulate everybody that's on this meeting. So
I'll
they will
send
get
everything to you. Yeah.
yeah, please. And of course, we will be making a donation to the relief fund. And please, if people can save the questions for the end of the two presentations, as we're running a little bit over time. But thank you very much for that, Francisco, for that update on what's happening. We know that the Americans always use disaster to try and get involved in people's countries. That's one of the strategies. An earthquake or hurricane, they send troops. We need doctors and nurses, as you rightly said.
Yeah. Look,
Okay.
can you allow me one sentence only?
Yeah, please.
An important dimension. Venezuela must survive. It must survive for Latin America, because if it doesn't, Cuba will not survive. And if Venezuela and Cuba do not survive, it will set back the struggle for emancipation for more than one generation. So it is vital for everybody to actually defend Venezuela and defend Cuba.
Yes. And it's good that you make that point, because, and of course, it's not only the sovereignty of Venezuela and Cuba being threatened, because every Caribbean country, and we see already how they've been bullying, Jamaica, Trinidad, all the countries in the region to try and implement the downward doctrine. We know what that means for all of us, recolonization and enslavement, if possible. But thank you very much. I'll ask Steve now to make a presentation before Paul comes on. Thank you, Steve. You take the floor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to give you a brief description of the colonial origin of